Lambeau Field,
Fenway Park,
the Rose Bowl, the athletic venues that stand as great monuments and landmarks in our sports landscape. This hour on Yahoo Sports Radio, we take you from coast to coast to the most famous stadiums and arenas in all of sports. Stadiums USA Radio.
In-depth conversation focusing on the popular venues across the sports globe, from the pros to the minor leagues to college.
The latest news in stadium design, renovations, and stadium connections to their communities. Your host, Bill Hazen, talks with athletes, coaches, authors, and newsmakers who share their experiences and connections to the most storied structures and stadiums in all of sports.
The conversation is now.
Broadcasting from Stadiums USA headquarters in Chicago, here's the man who was behind the mic, detailing Michael Jordan's entry into the NBA. And now, he is your official stadium guide, with your ticket to the latest stadium news and information. Here he is, Bill Hazen.
In all of the time we have been doing this program, one of the stadiums we have not focused on very much is Yankee Stadium, the original being the house that Ruth built, which was a huge stadium built in the late 20s. That has been replaced by a newer generation stadium, which has many of the same design features and is built nearby where the old stadium sat. There are a lot of issues associated with this stadium, which really reflect our economy and where we are in society today. That's what we're going to talk about, as well as the stadium itself. We're going to visit with Jason Clinkscales, who is a New York-based freelance sports writer, and he's been involved with the New York Beacon, the Sports Fan Journal, some of the places that you can see his work. He has also chronicled the Yankee Stadium transition from the old to the new, and he joins us today on Stadiums USA Radio. Jason, let's learn about the stadium itself. Take us inside and share with us what this famed Bronx ballpark is all about.
Sure. The stadium, it's essentially, people call it a shrine, a museum, a symbol of opulence. You can use a whole lot of adjectives to describe the stadium, but it is a massive building. The idea was it was to combine elements of the original Yankee Stadium that was being built. Mm-hmm. They wanted to combine some elements of the earlier age frieze, the Indiana limestone, things of that nature. With some of the expanded version of the later stadium that they actually rehabilitated in the 70s. Also, at the same time, they were looking to just sort of modernize some aspects. It was, as you guys talk about on your show pretty often, you're talking about chasing, larger dollars, corporate dollars, with finer amenities, larger luxury boxes, wider seats, unique kinds of seating in certain sections of the ballpark, and also to bring in fans that may not exactly be into baseball, but they're into just having a good time. So if you can sort of bring in that casual element, so be it. So the stadium itself, it's, as you mentioned, located across the street from the original stadium's location. And what they did was they replaced what used to be a public park, John Mullally Park, which had a large track, it had large, soccer fields, baseball fields, and the like, that was used by the public there. They basically replaced that land in order to build this new stadium. And in displacing the original park, they decided to build some smaller ones around the area and to sort of build this, to try to revitalize the area, if you will. It's a very interesting stadium. A lot of Yankee fans absolutely hate the place because they feel like it's missing some of the charms of the previous stadium. Some Yankee fans really like it. They like the fact that it has some more modern accoutrements. They like the fact that it has, as mentioned, wider seating, even though there are less seats. It likes the fact that it has that entire Yankee universe homage within it. It's a divisive issue within the Yankee universe, let alone within New York City and the rest of baseball.
Does the new park pay homage to the old one? And I say that because at the time the new park was completed, both stadiums were standing side by side. And I imagine before old Yankee Stadium was torn down, there was a chance for people to really compare them and see if one actually reflected the other. I'm sure you made that comparison. How did you sense it?
What I sensed was the opulence and the symbol that the new stadium is going to become. This is a franchise that built its name off of its own prestige, and it has a great history. I mean, we're talking about the most successful franchise in baseball. But they were also, they saw it with the old stadium. It had crumbled a little bit. I'm not sure if you remember the story, but it wasn't that long ago that actually a piece of a steel beam actually came down while the Yankees were on the road. So they saw that there was an opportunity to sort of remake the new stadium in a somewhat of a different image. And that image being, we're chasing the money fans. The Yankees as a franchise have always been imaged as that money glamorous franchise. But the stadium over time didn't necessarily reflect that. The stadium actually looked a lot more like the neighborhood rather than what the Yankees wanted. I think the best way to describe what people felt was, we're going over there to this newer building that doesn't feel like home. It's kind of like if you've spent most of your life at a certain home and you see this really nice, beautiful mansion down the street and you imagine all the possibilities in that mansion down the street. But then you're looking around, you're like, do I really want to leave home? And I think that's what a lot of Yankees fans felt. For myself, I kind of felt a little bit of the same way because I did have some of my first baseball experiences there.
We alluded to the rather fascinating phenomenon of empty seats among the best seats at Yankee Stadium. We're going to dig into that and find out what's behind it. Jason, in general terms, what is behind this phenomenon?
There are a couple things. One, when the stadium was being developed, when it was being built, the Yankees decided to sort of change the price structure a little bit. They wanted to bring a greater experience to those who typically pay premium prices for home plate seating and anywhere around the field. So they felt like, well, we want to bring them a premium experience. We're actually going to raise these prices up a bit. And the idea was, if you raise those prices to bring them this great, unique experience, they felt like they can actually make up for what would be ideally cheaper ticket prices throughout the rest of the stadium, especially in the bleacher seats, especially in the upper deck near the outfield. But it hasn't exactly panned out the way they wanted it to. But I do think a part of it has to do with the fact that when these stadiums were built and officially opened, this was around the time the Great Recession was really beginning to take hold. And there was a lot of controversy behind anything that appeared to be opulent, anything that appeared to be ostentatious. And so going to a game at Yankee Stadium, whether they were playing the Boston Red Sox when they were worthwhile, or whether they were playing, Tampa Bay when they weren't doing so great, the idea of them going to a Wednesday night game and paying upwards of $500-$1,000 for a Wednesday night game just seemed to be a little bit nuts.
Yeah, that a little bit of culture wars here, as it sounds like what you're describing to me. Does that seem to fit it?
Massive. It wasn't just Yankee Stadium. I mean, Citi Field has gone through largely the same deal. Citi Field for the New York Mets. Both stadiums were open at the same time. They both had similar deals, although the Yankees stadium deal ended up costing New York City and New York State a lot more. But I think, again, going back to it, the Great Recession kind of set the tone when it came to the perceptions of both stadiums. Many of these stadiums now have less seats, and with less seats, you end up changing your season ticket base a little bit. So when people would go and try to pick out their seats, they wanted to get seats that were what they had in the old stadiums. They couldn't get them. They couldn't get them because perhaps the stadiums, the seats cost too much, or it wasn't close to being the same seat that they had in the previous stadium. So you had a lot of season ticket holders, whether they were full season or partial season ticket holders, who felt that they were being pushed away from the experience they used to have. They didn't necessarily have that first-rate experience they believed that they were going to have when they opened up the new building. So there was a massive cultural disconnect. And plus, just to mention, there's actually a unique feature that the old stadium had that the new one didn't. As you probably seen on TV, the subway is like right next to the stadium, the 4 train. The 4 train, which takes people from parts of Brooklyn, Upper West, the east side of Manhattan, all the way to the Bronx. And it used to be at some point, used to be able to watch the game from the train platform. Years ago, George Steinbrenner, the late George Steinbrenner, decided to combat that by putting up a wall, if you will, to try to block people from watching the game from the train platform. When they built the new stadium, they ideally put that wall, if you will, in front of the train platform, said no one could even think of trying to see the game. That actually added a little bit of an allure to the stadium, especially for those people who lived in the area but didn't exactly have tickets. They can just go ahead, swipe their MetroCard or put in their tokens back in the day and go up and watch the game. And it didn't really hurt the stadium. It added to the old aura the stadium used to have. It added to that quote unquote Bronx Zoo era. And that sort of took something away from the stadium, going to the new building, as we've had now for close to 7 years.
I've seen this phenomenon when I was broadcasting the Chicago Bulls. Essentially the same thing occurred. It was in the mid-'80s, and I started having fans come up to me and say, in effect, the price on tickets is going up, and it's going to be a situation where I can't afford to hold on to them anymore. Now, they had waiting customers, but those customers were not as motivated as fans. And with that in mind, and kind of sensing the same thing has happened here, are those seats actually sold, which are empty, but the fans, perhaps new generation fans that are very rich, may not be motivated because at the core they're not as deep of fans as those who can't afford to go? So are those seats actually sold, or are they just not being sold?
It's a mix. The Yankees do attempt to sell. I mean, of course, you have to attempt to sell these things. But when it depends on the game, depending on how close they are to, how close we are to certain games, they may decide to give them away. And many people who are connected to either the Yankees, Major League Baseball, or some of their sponsors and their clients, they may come upon some of these tickets. I can certainly say I benefited from that a few times, where, through some former colleagues of mine at, past jobs, they would just give away some of these seats, not just the legend seats that have been talked about quite often, but even the seats that are around the field. So yeah, it's a mix of things. Like, they do sell the tickets, and then some of the people who may have bought the tickets in the past may resell them because they don't want to go for whatever reasons they may have, and then creates the reseller market. But then also there's a lot of giveaways. People don't want to talk about that very often, but you never thought that a seat that may be, say, in the 6th row behind home plate at Yankee Stadium when they're taking on a team like the Red Sox or the defending champion Kansas City Royals could be given away.
I would think that pricing in New York is very tricky. We all know that New York is a fascinating financial engine. Now, you're looking at this, and I could see somebody saying, hey, you know what? We can gun these tickets right off the scale because we have people here who can pay that. Did they just overprice these tickets?
Absolutely. I think the other thing that people have to understand about, and I won't pretend to be an economist, rich people don't always want to spend their money either. And I think people sort of miss out on that part. Look, if you're telling me, just because I'm a master of the universe down on Wall Street, you have to give me something of value. And that's the one thing people have to understand about that sort of clientele. Advertising execs, media execs, people like that, high-powered individuals in this city. Everybody wants something for something. And if people have these Yankee tickets and they're looking at a team, especially the team as currently constructed, Alex Rodriguez, the much maligned slugger, should be Hall of Famer, but won't be. You have a bunch of guys who are young and still forming their own careers with this team, but they're nowhere close to being Yankee legends, if you will. There isn't that, and to borrow the acronym FOMO, fear of missing out events, that would sort of help people come to the stadium and then trade off that experience for something else that these higher powered people might want. So I think that also plays a massive role into how, those seats behind home plate and around the stadium are not being filled.
Jason Clinkscales is a New York-based freelance sports writer. He has chronicled the Yankee Stadium transition from the old to the new.